All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. You know, when we talk about the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata, there are very few figures who command the kind of absolute, unquestioned reverence that Bhishma does. I mean, he is universally celebrated as the ultimate patriarch, the guardian of Hastinapur, and basically the walking, talking embodiment of sacrifice, discipline, and unwavering duty.
But let's pause right there for a second, because today we really need to look at this story from a totally different angle. What if we step away from all that traditional hero worship to investigate a much more uncomfortable reality? What if we look at the terrifying ripple effects of unintended consequences?
Right, because it really forces us to ask a super difficult question. Can a completely sincere, pure, and selfless act ultimately destroy an entire dynasty? We almost always assume that noble intentions are going to lead to noble outcomes, right? But as we're about to see with the historical context of the Kuru dynasty, sometimes the absolute most righteous sacrifices are exactly what trigger unforeseen generational disasters.
That is such a profound way to frame it. And to really understand how this generational disaster kicked off, we have to travel back to a fateful meeting right by the river Yamuna.
So the crucial point of origin here is King Shantanu. Now, after losing his first wife, the goddess Ganga, Shantanu is ruling Hastinapur, but he's just feeling completely incomplete. One day, he's by the river and he encounters Satyavati. She's helping her fisherman family ferry people across the water, and she possesses this divine fragrance, a boon from sage Parashara. Shantanu is instantly, hopelessly infatuated. He wants to make her his queen right then and there. But there is a massive catch. A truly staggering demand, right? Oh, absolutely. Satyavati's fisherman father agrees to the marriage, but on one incredibly steep condition. Only Satyavati's future sons can inherit the throne, and this is a huge problem, because Shantanu already has a rightful, incredibly capable heir, his son, Devavrata.
Now, it's super easy to just write this off as greedy ambition on the father's part, but recent academic perspectives, like feminist trauma theory, suggest there's something much deeper going on here. Satyavati wasn't just a simple fisherwoman. She was actually born of royal lineage, but she was abandoned and raised completely in the margins of society. Her original name was actually Matsyagandha, which literally means the one who smells of fish, a label of profound social humiliation. So when her father demands the throne, maybe it's not just blind ambition. It's really a marginalized family's trauma-driven survival strategy, you know? A way to secure some kind of permanence in a really rigid patriarchal power structure.
Wow. That context really shifts how we view the father's ultimatum. And seeing his father's heartbreak over this impossible demand, the young prince Devavrata steps up and takes the ultimate vow. He doesn't just renounce his absolute right to the throne, he actually takes a lifelong vow of celibacy, completely ensuring he'll never have children to challenge Satyavati's bloodline. This terrifying, unbreakable vow earns him the title of Bhishma. And for centuries, we've basically just called this a breathtakingly noble sacrifice for his dad. But is it? I mean, really? Because on the flip side, the unintended consequence here is just massive. By stepping down, the most capable, educated, and righteous leader in the entire kingdom effectively abandons the realm. He basically hands over the future of the empire to a guaranteed lineage of weaker, much less capable rulers. And sadly, that's exactly what happens. The dominoes just start falling. Shantanu dies, Satyavati's sons take over, but her son Vichitravirya proves to be a pretty weak successor, and then he dies without an heir. This leads to this desperate, absolute necessity of calling in sage Vyasa to perform Niyola, just to keep the royal bloodline from dying out completely.
Which of course creates a massive power vacuum, leading directly to the flawed reigns of Dhritarashtra and Pandu. I mean, installing Dhritarashtra, who was blind, as king was a highly controversial and arguably unethical adjustment that was born entirely out of panic and desperation.
Bhishma tried to solve a short-term family issue, right? But his vow became the very catalyst for generations of instability, and that instability ultimately culminated in the bitter, bloody rivalry between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. And just think about the crushing emotional weight this threw right back onto Satyavati. Bhishma's sacrifice didn't magically fix the kingdom. It basically dumped the entire burden of survival right onto the Queen Mother's shoulders. She's trapped by all these patriarchal expectations, forced to make morally agonizing decisions just to secure heirs. She essentially becomes the sole, emotionally isolated custodian of a collapsing dynasty. The system elevated her, sure, but it also completely imprisoned her in a state of constant, unbearable dynastic anxiety. Which brings us to the darkest, honestly most disturbing moment in the entire epic. The Hastinapur court, the rigged game of dice. Yudhishthira literally gambles away everything: his kingdom, his brothers, himself, and finally, his wife Queen Draupadi. When she's dragged into the court to be publicly humiliated, she asks this profound, legally and morally complex question. She asks, if Yudhishthira had already lost himself, did he still possess the right to stake her? The entire court just freezes. Everyone looks to Bhishma. He's the elder, the wisest man in the room. And what does he do? He stays completely silent. This is incredibly painful to process, especially for someone so revered. But we have to look at his internal rationale here. He felt bound by this concept called salt loyalty, nama kalal. Because he had eaten the food of the Kauravas and lived under the patronage of the throne for decades, he felt this inescapable obligation to the ruling authority. And that was regardless of who actually sat on the throne or what they were doing.
Exactly. He is trapped in a Dharma Sankata, a totally paralyzing moral crisis. Every single choice he has violates some sacred principle. Does he maintain his lifelong vow to the throne, or does he step up and defend the innocent? Does he favor institutional loyalty or his own personal conscience? He absolutely knew the Kauravas were committing profound adharma, but overanalyzing this complex web of duties literally paralyzed him. And here's the brutal truth of the situation. In the face of absolute evil, neutrality is not a safe haven. Neutrality is actually a form of active participation in that injustice.
And this moral paralysis ultimately spills right out onto the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And it creates one of the most bizarre, genuinely baffling military paradoxes in all of history. Bhishma is out there fighting for the Kauravas. He commands their army for 10 whole days. But he goes out of his way to actively avoid killing the 5 Pandava brothers simply because he knows they are on the side of righteousness.
It's wild, because his strategy is essentially self-defeat. On one hand, he fulfills his external duty by fighting fiercely by day, just decimating the Pandava army. But then, in this staggering twist, he allows the Pandavas into his tent at night and secretly gives them the exact strategic advice they need to defeat him. And finally, he allows Arjuna to strike him down, using Shikhandi as a shield to escape his moral bind. It really forces us to ask, is actively undermining your own army an act of profound, enlightened wisdom? Or is it just the ultimate, tragic form of self-deception to escape an impossible moral conflict?
And you know, it's a question that echoes right into our modern world. Just think about corporate ethics today. Think about the accountant who discovers massive fraud, or the whistleblower inside a totally corrupt organization. Do you remain faithful to the institution that feeds you and pays your salary? Or do you follow your moral conscience and blow the whistle, even if it completely destroys the very system you vowed to protect? The parallel is pretty striking, isn't it? Bhishma was a man bound to a toxic system because he took a vow before the system turned toxic. His ancient dilemma is exactly the same conflict that so many professionals face today.
So, synthesizing everything we've unpacked today about this tragedy of the righteous, we start to see that rigid vows, when they're divorced from adapting wisdom, they basically become inescapable traps. Spot on. Bhishma held the absolute highest position in the kingdom, but because he lacked the actual freedom to act against the throne, that position was really nothing more than a golden prison. And honestly, his immense knowledge of the scriptures actually worked against him. Overanalyzing all these complex duties paralyzed his ability to just do the obviously right thing, which was to step in and stop Draupadi's humiliation. It just goes to show us that sincere devotion and personal sacrifice, no matter how pure the intentions are, they just don't erase long-term, devastating consequences.
We always celebrate Bhishma for his selfless renunciation, but by stepping away and remaining so rigidly bound to an outdated vow while Dharma was literally being destroyed right in front of him, it forces us to ask, was history's greatest sacrifice actually the very catalyst that made the catastrophic war of the Mahabharata inevitable? It challenges all of us to rethink the true cost of absolute, unquestioning loyalty. It's definitely something to deeply reflect on. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer.